All right, today we're going to focus almost exclusively, almost the entire day on events, right? Events are really the magic that makes JavaScript interactive. An event is anything that happens inside the browser, generally that is going to be user controlled, right? So when I click a button, when I move my mouse, when I drag something, when I try to submit a form, when I input some text, those are all events. And we're going to take a look at each and every one of those and explore how we can use them to build interactive products, right? All of our interactivity starts with an event. The event is what kicks off the function that, we're going to write functions to do things in the product. It's always going to be fired off generally by a user doing something. Okay, so let's take a look at let's see. Let's pull up I don't have a. There we go. Let's look at this one. Right, we were working on this yesterday. This is our paper rock scissors game. Let's open a new window. Just pull up a form. Let's start from scratch. That'll be easier. All right, we're going to show off two different ways to make events, but we're going to start with like the old-fashioned way that is like the JavaScript. Before JavaScript was like a robust environment. Let's open folder. What was that we would write our events, our JavaScript event trackers inside of our HTML, right? That's not the best way to do things, but it is an interesting way to like see how we got to where we are. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make one called JS events. Should make a folder first time. New folder. JS events. Right, great. Perfect. So I'm going to create a folder. JS. Create a file. Index.html. Great. And we'll use our boilerplate. Right. JavaScript events. And I'm actually going to create a repository, and I'm going to publish this all up, so we'll have a reference to look at because we're going to explore a bunch of things today. Initial entry, great. Yes. All right, and then we're going to go in here and let's. Oh, I can't do it from here, can I? I'm going to do this. New terminal. rm-rf.get. I'm going to do this at GitHub first. JS events. Okay. Oh, I created it last semester. Dang it. All right, we're gonna do this from this direction. GitHub.com. I'm going to go to Code Bootcamp 13. Create a new repository, and I'm going to call it JS events. Make it public so you guys can see it. README, get ignore. Perfect. Node. All right. So I'm creating a repository because I want you guys to be able to reference this document because we're going to spend a lot of time in here today. So I'm going to do git note add origin. Right, good. Git init. Git remote add origin. Perfect. And we'll do a git pull real quick to grab that README file. What did it say? Yeah. Git pull origin main. All right. We're all caught up now, so we can see we got our get ignore, we got our index, which isn't tracked. All right, but what we're going to do in here is let's put in some elements. So we'll just call h1 JS events. Okay. So the first element that we want to take a look at, right? So this is kind of the old-fashioned way. Keep that in mind. Is that we would have events that existed inside the browser, inside of our HTML, when we used an attribute called on and then something, right? So if I do onLoad in the body, for example, when this body element has loaded, it's going to run this JavaScript code. So I can say alert hello, right? And let's open this bad boy up. Open with live server. And you can see that when the page loads, it alerts hello for us, right? We can also do an onClick event and say, alert click, right? And when the page loads, great. And as soon as click doesn't work on this, on body. That's unfortunate. But we will see that in a second, right? So we would use onClick generally on buttons, right? So we'd say button onClick equals alert clicked. Perfect. And we'll put in click me button. Okay. See how every time I click this button, it's going to run this line of code. This string that we put in this attribute can have multiple lines of JavaScript in it. We would just put in, say, like, alert clicked again, right? So as long as you're separating your statements with a semicolon, which tells it, hey, this statement is done, then when I click this, it will do clicked and then clicked again. So it's going to run each of these in sequence as if you'd had it be its own independent thing. Now, if I was to come in here, this is traditionally how we would write code like this in the 90s and early 2000s, right? We would actually define our code as a script tag, right? And we would say, you know, function, something, call it click handler or something, right? We'd give our function a name, and we would say, you know, like alert, hello, you clicked me, right? And then we would return true, right? And so instead of having a whole bunch of JavaScript code in our attribute like this, we would simply have all of the code we want to run wrapped in a function. So we would say click handler, right? So that every time I click this button, right, it says, hello, you clicked me. Okay? That would be the old-fashioned way. That's how we generally handled click events in the browser. Now, the load event that goes on the body and the click event that goes on buttons, links, it really can go on anything, right? We can do on click in here, and we say click handler. Right, this should work. So now if I click on this, right, I clicked on my H1 element, that got the click event. Okay? We also have an on mouse enter, right? We could do on mouse over. There's a whole bunch of mouse specific events. And we're going to look at these individually, but we could write this in our attribute here, and we could say on mouse over equals, let's give ourselves an element here. Div ID equals, we'll call this like mouse. Let's just say event log, right? Div. So what we'll do is we'll write a function, and we'll say function mouse over. And what we'll do is we'll say document.getElement by ID event log dot inner HTML equals mouse over. Good. Right. So if I was to mouse over our H1 now, right? Mouse over. As soon as I do that, here, let's turn off this load. This is going to drive me crazy. Goodbye. Okay. So as soon as I mouse over this H1, that changes to, the text appears that says mouse over, right? And the H1 goes the entire length of the page, right? If we were to style H1 background color. Right? As soon as my mouse goes over this element, that mouse over text appears. Right? Now, just like with mouse over, there is also a mouse out. Right? So mouse out, on mouse out. Let's do mouse out. And we'll say, we'll do the same thing, but just take out that. Right? We'll say mouse out. So as soon as the mouse leaves this input, it leaves it. Okay. Oh, that's named mouse over again. Should mouse out. So now when we enter, it says mouse over. When we leave, it says mouse out. Over, out. Over, out. There are a bunch of different on something attributes, on events that happen that we can take advantage of in an attribute like this, but there's a far better way when we start writing this behind the scenes with JavaScript. Some of the other ones that we would sometimes do, right? Form, for example, has an on submit. On submit. Right? Because we submit forms. On submit. And so generally what we can do is we could say, check form. Right? And what we want to do here is return this to on submit, right? And so if I put, let's put a action equals, let's call it like form not HTML, right? We're going to actually try and submit it somewhere. Method equals get, right? If I was to put input type equals text, name equals name, great. And then we do input type equals submit, value equals submit, right? If I do, let's say, return, function check form, right? And we just say by default return false, and then we'll check if document dot get element by ID username dot value equals Eric, right? Return alert form is good and return true, right? So by default, right, because we're returning false, if I don't put anything in this element, which I gotta call ID equals username, right? If I don't put a value in here, it will not let this form submit. And we can even write that in here so we can see this. We can say document.get element by ID event log dot inner HTML equals form submit stopped. Okay. So if I try to submit my form, you'll see that it says form stopped. If I put in Olivia and I submit, it's still going to be stopped. If I put this to Eric, because I'm checking to see the value of this and seeing if it's Eric, now it's going to return true. It alerts form is good, and it will submit that form. So now, obviously, it takes us to a page that doesn't exist yet. But the onSubmit lets us stop or check our information before we actually post that data to the server. onSubmit. The elements themselves. Let's actually add HR in here, right? So we get a little bit of space, right? So this button stands alone. So this is the form. The form has a whole bunch. Form elements have a whole bunch of special form specific elements, right? And so we'll come in here and say onBlur, and we're going to call it onBlur. Okay, and what onBlur does is whenever I leave that field, so maybe we'll start with focus first, right? So when we click on this field, it's focusing. When we leave the field, right, when we tab to another element, or if we had multiple elements in here, blur is the leaving event. And so we'll add on focus in here as well. On focus equals on focus. All right, where are we at here? So I'm going to make those two functions. On function on blur, and we'll say document.get element. Get element by ID, event log dot inner HTML equals left blurred the input. Okay, and then the other one is function on focus, and that one is that we've entered the element, right? Entered. Right? So this is blur and focus are specific to form elements, right? So as soon as I click into this box, I'm putting my focus on this element. And you can see that it changes this to entered, focused, the element. And as soon as I click tab, or I click to another part of the page, right? Anything that causes my cursor, my little cursor that lets me type, as soon as I leave that element, it calls the blur event. Okay? So let's take some notes where we're at right now. Right? So we've learned, let's see, onLoad equals the page has loaded. Mouse over equals you have moved your mouse over an element. Mouse out is you have moved your mouse out of an element. On submit. Let's make these all ons. On. Mouse out. On submit equals you have submitted the form. On focus, you are looking at an HTML input. On blur, you have left an HTML input. Those are the ones we've looked at so far. This type of JavaScript using the attributes of the HTML is kind of super duper old fashioned. Very rarely will you do this anymore. I mean, maybe the one place I would still see this being used ever is this, maybe the onSubmit function. But because we can trap and capture all of these events on the JavaScript side as well, most of the time you don't see this type of thing being done anymore. So let's copy this, right? Let's make a new page, copy, and we'll say paste, and we'll say JavaScript events. Okay, so those are all of our functions that we've defined to do the things that we're doing. Instead of having the functions defined in our HTML attributes, generally what we do is we will define them in our JavaScript itself, right? So what we would do is we would say something like document.getElementById button, .add event listener. Then we put in the name of the event that we want to look for. So this is like when we said on mouse over, on mouse out, on click. It's the part that comes after the word on. So for the JavaScript version of creating events, we just say add event listener click. That's the first argument. Then it gets a comma, and what comes next is the function that will handle that event. The function that will handle that event. So I can write this here as an anonymous function, and I can say alert, the button was clicked. Now this is going to fail because this script tag is inside our head before those elements have loaded, and we can't call this internal style sheet like this with defer. So what I'm going to do just to make this easier on ourselves is now it's time to move us over to a JavaScript file, and we'll call this JS events. Okay. And we'll just paste all that code in there so that we're caught up. I'm going to move it all back. Okay. So in the JavaScript event, right, load, mouse out, on focus. All right, and then we'll load this element in here. So we'll say script source equals JS events, and we'll put in defer so that this will all work for us. Okay. So if I gave this an ID equals button. Right? When I come into my code, right, we're writing this, the new fancy in JavaScript way to create events is that we're saying document.getElementById button, so we named our button that ID, add event listener click, so on any click, that's not alert because that'll drive me bonkers. Let's do document.getElementById event log inner HTML equals clicked. Right? And so now when we load this page, if we go to the new one we made, JS events.html, perfect. Right? Now that log is running because we created the same kind of event just inside JavaScript itself and not polluting our HTML with an on something event attribute. Now, let's dissect for a second this format, right? So this add event listener function, exists on any HTML element that you can reference from the DOM, right? So if I did document.body, right, that has an add event listener function. I could also do document.add event listener, right? So that will be like on the whole page. And so we'll often do document.add event listener, and we'll maybe use like the DOM content loaded function to say, hey, the page has loaded function, and I'll put in here the page has loaded, right? So this DOM content loaded event is a special event for the document that says, hey, when the page has loaded all the elements, call this function. And we just created this as an anonymous function in line, right? Doesn't have a name. The only place it's being referenced or used is being passed to this add event listener function. as an argument. And so now you'll see that when the page loads, the very first thing it does is it says the page is loaded. If I was to put right here, right, the debugger statement, right, and we reload this page, we open up our JavaScript console, sources. Did it go in? Right. Let's put it in here. So as soon as that event fires, it has halted the execution, and you can see the page has finally finished loading. And if we step, we can see that now this event log is going to run. What we use DOM content loaded for, just as a quick aside, is that if we did not put defer in here, right, you'll notice that when we load this page, we should get a bunch of errors, right? It's going to say, cannot read properties of null, right? And if we click on that link, it's going to say, hey, document.getElementById button, this button does not exist yet. Our script has executed before this element has existed. So what we would traditionally do when we're writing JavaScript libraries and frameworks is that we would wrap our entire bit of code inside of this, right? So any event listeners that relied on elements existing, right, we would define inside of a DOM content loaded function. So now if we load this, now we get no more errors, and the click event works because this function fires when the page is ready, which then defines this event listener on a button that now exists, so that now we can click it. You will still see this event used pretty frequently for people who like to write libraries, because it basically is like a safety net to make sure that even if you're a user, if you're trying to like give out a JavaScript library, you have to kind of guarantee that they put defer in here. Or you can write your code in such a way that it doesn't matter if it's deferred or not. You can wrap all of your functions that rely on an element being there to exist only after the page has finished loading. So this is a real good one to use. Just like that. Right? Now, all of these functions that we defined up here, right? These are functions. So we wrote, right, the syntax of, here, let's stay in here since we're doing it, right? The syntax of our add event listener is always, right, it takes two arguments. The event itself is the first one. Click, load, mouse over, mouse out. The second argument is always a function. Always a function. So oftentimes you'll see it written like this, where people will just write the function in the line as an anonymous function. But there's nothing preventing us from going through, let's see, like let's do this one. Let's do the on blur here. So input ID username. So if I was to come in here and say document.getElementById, username, that's our input, .add event listener, and then we wanted to do blur, I can literally just type in on blur here. I'm not putting parentheses because I'm not executing the function. I'm telling this element to have a function ready to go for when I blur. We already wrote this function up here. I'm literally just saying, hey, when this event happens, call this function. I can do the same thing with this. Document.getElementById username .add event listener focus on focus. And now, right, you see that it's got the blurred the input and then left the input. I gotta make this smaller so that that's stupid. Let's just turn autocomplete off. That'll solve this. Autocomplete equals off, maybe. Perfect. So entered left. The exact same code that we wrote before to handle the event, we can now just pass that in as the name of the handler that we want to run when we call add event listener. So when you're building large frameworks, when you're building large libraries, what you'll often see is this kind of structure where all of your HTML has been set up, and then somewhere in your script, you're going to have all of the events that you want to track kind of defined in here, right? You write all your functions up at the top. This is what is actually happening when these events happen. And then down at the bottom, we attach those functions to the element that we want them to be run on. Any questions about that? Go ahead.
And you said this was the previous way of doing it, of incorporating JavaScript events.
No, so this is the current way. This is how we do things today.
Okay, and the previous
The
one was
previous
the
way was we would write like an on whatever attribute.
okay, got it.
Um, I don't see this much at all anymore. Ever, really. But just know that it's available to you. Yeah, because, I mean, even in here, like, it follows the same kind of principle of you want your HTML to just be document structure. You want your CSS to be document presentation. You want your JavaScript to be completely separate as, like, document application interaction. So you don't want to mix and match your JavaScript inside of your HTML. It's just not good practice. And there's all sorts of reasons why. Probably the biggest one is, if you're a developer and you have a JavaScript file, and you know that if you click this button something happens, where would you go to look to know what code is actually running, right? Because we can do both, right? So we can do. So let's take this out. All right. So if we look at our code right now. Right, so the focus is working, the left is, the blurred is working. When we put code in here, right, we have those functions defined in our JavaScript, but I can come in here and say, like, let's put it on the on focus. You can do, like, this dot style dot background color equals green, right? And so now it's changed to green. The focus event has fired. If you're the developer, where do you go to look when they say, hey, we want that not to be green? And you go and you look in your JavaScript code and you're like, focus event, that's not making anything green. Why would that happen? It just makes things way complicated. So if you start having like this rule of anything that is style is going to be in the CSS, anything that is JavaScript is going to be in a JavaScript file somewhere or be in at least a script tag on the page. And then HTML, just let it be the document. Let it be the content. It makes it easier for you to like navigate around and find where things are. Go ahead, Olivia.
So, what if you had like multiple ones? Like, say you had a form and you asked like to buy option 1 or option 2. Can you do an event listener for each button?
So what are you describing?
Like, if it was you know how yours just says submit and it's listening to that. What if you had something where it's 3 options and you wanted to listen to an event listener on each one, like to
Yeah, there's lots of ways to approach that. So you're talking about like maybe there's a checkbox or radio or something where you toggled 3 choices. Yeah. So submit is the event that happens when you try to actually submit the form. Generally, when you're talking about like real-time interaction, like you make a choice and you want something else to happen, you would probably put that on a different element, right? So let's put in an input in here. Take this code out. So let's say input type equals radio, ID equals radio 1, name equals radio choice, value equals. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is the current Ray, correct?
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
So I'm gonna make a radio, like a 3-choice radio thing here, right? And we'll do blue, green, red. Okay, and we'll maybe just put a label in here. Label for radio. Oh, let's just do blue. Green, red. All right. So there's a bunch of ways to approach this. If we look at our HTML, right? We got a blue, a green, and a red. Now, on submit, we can always check the value, right? If we wanted to capture it on the, I don't think we have an event here, so let's ID equals form. Take this out so we don't have bad code floating around. My form. So I could do on document.getElement by ID my form dot add event listener submit function. Right, we want to do something. Right. So we can inside this form, right, before we submit it, we can see what is the current value of the radio thing, right? We can say, let's say blue equals false, bar red equals false, bar green equals false. And what we can simply do is if document.getElement by ID, what do we call it? Radio 1, radio 2, radio 3. Radio 1 dot checked. What is the is checked thing? Let's see. Radio is checked. JavaScript. I always forget this one. I hardly ever use radio. Oh, dot checked. That's easy. Dot checked. Right. You can say blue equals true. Else if we do radio 2 checked, and then that would say red equal blue. We did green next, right? Green equals true. Else if do the same thing, right? So this is one way, and this is on the submit. Red equals true, and then we can do something with these values that we set, right? So we can say, document dot body dot style dot background color equals. Let's just make it the color. Right? Let's just say blue. Oh, we can do it like this. Let's just say color. Var color equals, I don't know, white. And so then we'll say color equals blue, color equals green, color equals red. Right? Equals color. So now, we want to and we'll talk about those two things here in a second, but I want to just show this off real quickly. Where are we at? Right here. Right here. Perfect. So now, when I try to submit this form, it's going to change the color based on whatever I picked as my color here, right? So, perfect. So that would be like the on the submit, right? It's only happening when I click the submit button or I hit enter, right? Like Eric, right? If I change this to, right? Now it's going to be green. Oh, I should have fixed that label, huh? Green. But I think maybe what is a more interesting thing is that because these are elements, I could maybe say, I would maybe create them their own, right? Document dot get element by ID radio 1 dot add event listener, and then we maybe do like shift. Function event. Let's see if this even works. So let's say if event if this dot value or if this dot checked background body dot background document dot body background color equals blue. Right. So now, whenever this value changes, I don't think change is the right event for this. Let's look this up. I already have this open as a tab somewhere. Yeah, so there's all these different events. Let's see, input events maybe? let's JavaScript checked event. It's on click. That's not right. Checkbox state change event. Maybe this is it. Change. Let's see if we can debug this. Console.log this. So if I click here, yeah. Okay. If this not checked. Why didn't it set the body background color blue? Interesting. Change color? Question mark. Let's see what happens if this event is firing even. Yeah, it should. Document. No, oh, dot style, dot background color. Boy, we sure messed that up, didn't we? See? We forgot a single property. So now our background color didn't change. Perfect. So what we would probably do is, right, we could take this function, because we want to use it for all three of those radios. Let's create it up here instead of being an anonymous function. So we'll say on change radio. And because this inside of an event listener is the element that has fired that event, right? This is always going to be a reference, right, to the element, console.log this. What we can do is we can say, you know, the style that background color equals this dot value, right? Because we define the value of the element that is getting the thing here to be that color, right? So if I was going to, right, radio 1, if we just put on change radio, right, I can use this same function for all three of those elements, radio 1, radio 2, radio 3. Okay, and now when I click this, right, it's happening on the click itself. It still will function like on the submit, it would still do it, but we could choose what to do when we're doing this information, when we're doing the actual event. Now, this is a silly example. You probably would never want to change the background color like this, but you know, in the context of I'm building something real, right? If I was to write it, you know, on submit for this form, right? Our on submit should say, hey, don't actually submit the page. Grab the value, create a new element, and move my form down one. Right? So we can do real world things with our forms, with our user input, by capturing these events that exist for us in JavaScript. All right. So one thing to note is that when we use the document.addEventListener function, right? When we're using this method of an element, each of these functions gets passed a magical event object. The event object is going to get passed as the main argument for any function that is used as a callback for an add event listener. So let's take a look at what that event object has, because it has a ton of stuff in here. And generally, the way I would play with this is that let's where do we have a radio button, right? The click handler, right? So this is our button. This is our button code. Click me, right? It's doing that click. Click me. Oh, we didn't. We wrote it down here. Where's our code? Click, click, click. Here it is. Perfect. So we can type in event in here. Actually, let's see that event. And what you can do to just explore this object is console.log event. Right? I very rarely remember all the things that generally when I'm using this event object, I use like one or two things all the time, and I remember those. Event.target is a good example. But what I will do is I will console.log this event so that I can explore what's in this object, right? And so it's got all kinds of information in here. It's telling you, where was your mouse on an X and Y coordinates when you clicked it, right? If I click this again, right, this is 24,115. If I clear this out and I click it kind of over here, right? Now it's 76,101. 76,101. then it's, if you've got any kind of layers in here, if you've got any kind of weird position absolutes, right? There's other x and y coordinates. There's an offset x and an offset y, page x, page y, all kinds of x and y coordinates based on where it thinks your mouse is in terms of the screen. Screen x, right? So you'll notice I have two monitors. This browser is on my second monitor, so I am negative 1742 pixels to the left when I click on this button. If I was on my other page, on my other monitor, way on this side, right in front of me, this would be some positive number, right? Because it starts at 0 in between monitor 1 and monitor 2. The event.target, this is one I use all the time, and we'll explore why here in a minute. But the target says the actual lowest level element that was clicked, right? So right now it says button, right? When I click this, it's always going to say a button. If I was to put an element inside of it, like a strong, right? Strong. I don't know if this will work, but we'll try it. Right, so now that button has got a strong on it. If I click on that, the event target is actually the strong element, but the button still captured the click. The button is where our event handler is, but the target that I clicked on, the lowest level element, was the strong. If I click on me, now this one will say button. So if you've got a whole bunch of elements nested together, one of the things that we can do, and one of the things that we will do, is you're going to probably write your event handler on the topmost container. So when we were talking about Flexbox or grids, we've been using this concept of saying, I'm going to have a div on the outside and I'm going to have a whole bunch of content on the inside. You can write a click handler or an event handler that will sit on the parent container and then do things based on what was the actual target that was clicked. Right, we'll show this off here in a second. So let's make one. Let's make one real quick. So I'm going to make myself a new little section. Okay. And let's say div id equals container div, right? And let's just put in 3 boxes. Div id equals box1. Let's give these a class. Class equals box. Okay. I'm just going to copy this 3 times. And let's give ourselves a little bit of style here. Box 2, box 3. Let's do ID container display flex. Okay, good. And then we'll do dot box background color. Let's do like 999. Border 1px solid black, and height 200px, width 200px. Right. So I'm just gonna I should just see 3 boxes in here. Right. Perfect. And let's do gap 20px. Right. Give ourselves a little, yeah, perfect. So what I can do, and let's put a h2 box 1, h2 box 2, h2 box 3. Okay. I can write an event handler on this container, right? On this container, and have it fire and do different things based on what actual box is clicked on, right? So I can say document dot get element by ID container dot add event listener click, right? And this function, right, because it is an event handler function, gets that event object, and it doesn't matter what you name this in here, right? I almost always either name this event or E or EV, just based on whatever I'm feeling, right? And I try to be consistent throughout the product, but it is the event object, right? So in here, I might say if event.target.id equals box 1, how do I name it? Box underscore box, yeah, box 1, right? This dot, I'll do event.target.style.background color equals pink. Else if event.target.id equals box 2, box 2. Maybe we'll do this one purple. Okay. So If I click on that, it turns pink. If I click on this, it turns purple. If I click on this, it does nothing. But the event is still firing even if we don't do something with it, right? So we can say console.log clicked in container, right, comma event, right? We'll just say so that we can like explore, right? So you'll see I'm clicking in the container, but the event target is telling us that like we're doing something based on who actually got clicked in here. We'll often use this to build menus. We'll often use this in things like this, where we're saying like I don't know how many elements are going to be in here, so I don't want to create an event handler and try to attach it to each and every one of these items. What I can do is say, hey, I've got a list in here, and if I click inside of it and the event target is an li, is one of our list items, let's mark it as done. Let's complete it. So that way it doesn't matter. We can write one handler that handles a bunch of different cases for us. Maybe what I do is I write one global, right? I can do this same thing, right? Right? Instead of document.getElementByID, let's do it on document.body, right? Document.body. So now any click in this application is going to fire that event, right? See, it's popping this down the console, but still, what happened? But still, those work when the event happens in, when we actually check to see if the event.target was what we wanted to go to. All right, it's 4:51. Maybe let's take our first break. Come back at 5:05, and we'll keep playing with events. Before we move on, is there any questions about anything we covered so far? Anything we want to talk about in terms of how to write a JavaScript event listener, how to attach it to an element, and so on? No? All right. The other thing to note is that while we were talking about the event object, and we were saying, hey, the event.target is often a way to see, have we clicked on an element that is inside of an element? The other thing to note is that this property, if we do console.log this, always refers to the element that we attach the event listener to. So if we click this, right, if I click here, it's telling us body, and then it's telling us event.target is, in this case, I clicked on the event log element, right? Clicked on that element just through sheer luck. If I click over here, right? Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, can't even find a blank spot. But right, so you can see that this is always the body. That's where we attach the event to, and the event.target is what actually was clicked. And you can see there's a path attribute in here that shows us some really interesting things, right? It's showing us this was the lowest element that we clicked on. This is the next one. So it's almost like the path if we had done a loop through that said like a, the event.target.parent, right? Which would be the node above it, right? So if we were to click, right, this box is supposed to turn purple, right? Because we have this code here that says, if the event.target.id is box 2, event.target.style.background color is purple, right? So if we click on this, you would expect that box to turn purple, but in reality it did not, because we clicked on the H2 that's inside of it, right? And so the box, the one we're actually checking, if we wanted this box to turn purple, was one level above. So often what you'll have to do is you might have to even just loop through these, right? You might have to say, for var I equals 0, I is less than event.path.length, right? Event.path.length I plus plus. Right, so we're going to start at whatever we clicked on. So we would write our code in here, right? And instead of it being event.target.box, right, we would do event.path.i, event.path.i.id, and event.path.i dot ID, right? So now if I click on the H2, it'll turn the H2, right? So I would want to do event dot path. I want to do the same thing here, right? Event dot path. So you have to be aware this would be like delegation. And the word delegation in this instance means we put the event handler on something that's higher than ourselves, and we're going to check when a condition is met if it's happened anywhere up or down this chain, right? So like if I click here now, the box turns back to purple. If I click here, it does nothing. If I click inside the box, it goes up to purple, right? So what we might want to do, just to show us off, right, we could say event.path I, right? Let's console.log this. Console.log. Right, and so now wherever I click on this page, it's going to show me what I clicked on, right? In this case, all the way up, right? It's going to say, because we're looping through it, it's going to say I clicked on box 3, then I clicked on the container, then it went to onload, then it went to this thing. This is called bubbling, right? So when the event happened, like it's checking up and down the chain to see if there's an event handler somewhere that can fire it for us. Okay. There's another cool thing that we can do, right? So let's add ourselves an anchor tag. Ahref, let's go. AID is my link. Href equals, let's make this go to index.html. We'll say click me for a secret. Right? Right? So if I wanted to put a click handler on this element, document.getElement by ID, my link dot add event listener, click function event. Let's say I wanted to make it so when I click this link, it's going to change the background color of the page. So we'll say document body style background color equals medium sea green. So when I click this, I would expect it to make the page medium sea green. Except, you'll notice that it quickly flashed. I don't know if you were able to catch that. It did change it to green, but then it immediately navigated to this other page, because that has a default behavior attached to it. So this is the same as a form, right? If I click a submit button, the form submits. If I click a link, the link goes to the link. We have to turn that behavior off if we want JavaScript to capture this element. So we have a function, a method on the event object called prevent default. And if we call this, that is going to stop the default action. So now if I click this, it doesn't go anywhere, and it performs our actions. Right? So generally, when you're writing some JavaScript code, you want it to do something, you want it to have some interaction, but we want it so that, like, we made this an anchor tag. But lots of people will come to our page without JavaScript, right? Without JavaScript turned on. So we still want our page to work. We still want this link to be functional, right? So we'll still use an anchor tag. We want it to be able to take us somewhere. But if they have JavaScript turned on, we want it to do something special or something new and unique. So by using the event.preventDefault function, we can stop the default behavior for people who have JavaScript, and we can handle that kind of stuff ourselves, right? We could even come in here and say something cutesy like document.getElement by ID, what do we call it? Event log, inner HTML equals leaving page in 5 seconds, right? And then we can say, what is the, gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. What is the way to do a timer in JavaScript? Timer in JavaScript. Holy moly. I've written these a million times. Set time. Sheesh. Oh. So let's say we wanted to set timeout, and we said function window.location.href equals document.getElement by ID mylink dot get attribute href, right? So we're going to take whatever the link value is here, and we're going to go to that in 5 seconds. So 5,000 milliseconds. Right? And so now on our page, right, if you've got JavaScript turned on, you're going to see leaving page in 5 seconds. We're still going to go to this page. The link is still going to work, but we did some things in between then. We did some JavaScript. So maybe if we're building some kind of thing, an application that needs to make sure the data is saved, maybe we save the data before we let them leave. This gives us all kinds of opportunities. By preventing the default leaving behavior, we can then do something and then still implement that leaving behavior if we need to. Or in some cases, maybe what we do is, we don't leave the page at all, but we simply, when we're using JavaScript, maybe we replace the page content with the contents of the other page, right? So we'll have JavaScript fetch that data for us and replace and update the page silently. That would be like dynamic page loads in single page applications where you don't ever actually leave the page, but when someone clicks a link, it loads some of that content that was at that other address. So that's prevent default. Very useful. The same works for submits, right? So do we have let's go back to the other page. Do we have, if I submit this, I have it still turned off in my HTML. Nope. Do we have it in our JavaScript? Username, blur. Oh, okay, good. Oh, yeah, we did it here as well. All right, so we said, hey, don't submit this form, right? So if I was to use this form normally, it's trying to go to that page as soon as I submit. But if I wanted to capture that and prevent that from happening, we would use that same function, event.prevent default. Right? And so now, when we try to submit, it doesn't go anywhere. It's stopped the default behavior from happening. Go ahead.
So does the information get submitted, or
it doesn't? It doesn't traditionally, right? So normally the submission is what is submitting that data. What we would do now, if we were, when we get to this, we're going to get to this stage, I think later this week, or what we would probably want to do is grab all the form values and then submit them with Ajax, right? So we would use JavaScript to grab all those form values and then submit them to the server without causing the page to load, right? So we would go in here and say, var my name equals document.get element by ID, what do we call it, username dot value, and then we would write, like var xhr equals new XML HTTP request. And it takes, perfect. And then we do xhr.on load, right? A whole bunch of special XHR specific functions that would submit that request on our behalf, right? And then we would do xhr.open. We would put in like a post, the URL to submit to, so like form.html, right? So that would be how, if I wanted to, right, ASDF. If we go to our network tab now, and we clear this out, maybe we can, this is going to be a 404 because we don't have that page created. And then I have to do xhr.send. Right, there we go. Right, you can see that it made that request behind the scenes with JavaScript, and we can capture the return and display it on the page or do something with it and just let it know, hey, the record was saved. But if JavaScript was turned off, this would still, in theory, you'd still be able to write code that works for browsers that have no JavaScript, because it would still submit and post to that endpoint. So this is how we write progressively enhanced websites, right? It's going to work because it's traditional HTML, but if they're using JavaScript, they're going to get a much nicer experience.
So when we're creating the websites, we have to create the website so that it could be HTML and CSS only, and all three along with JavaScript.
That's going to depend on your use case. if you're Amazon and the difference between someone buying, $1 billion worth of stuff is whether they have JavaScript turned on or not, like I'm going to make my product work any possible way it can. If you're building a website for yourself, I mean, maybe I'll skip a whole bunch of these steps because I know what browser I'm using. I can always fix my code if it ever breaks in the future. There's like a risk reward here of like how much extra steps do you want to put into making sure it works for everybody versus like I'm just going to make it work as quickly as I can.
So to be on the safe side, you just make it work for everyone.
I mean, I generally do, but I am often working in an environment where I'm going to build it to be as simple as possible first. I'm not even going to write any of this front-end JavaScript code to submit with Ajax most of the time. I'm going to build it to be just a more traditional website. Like it's going to have a form, it's going to submit stuff to the backend. The backend is going to return back a response and say, yes, this is good. And then at some point I'm going to get, if you build a big enough company or you build a big enough product, you're going to want to build an API anyway that is going to have endpoints that match that same thing. So instead of going to /form, you'll have like a /API/form that's going to accept the exact same arguments. But now I can write JavaScript to it, or I can write a mobile app that submits to that API endpoint, or I can write, any number of things.
So just speaking from your experience, you would create the front end using HTML and CSS, and all your back end would be JavaScript.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I do any JavaScript on the front end, it's like lightweight stuff. Like I'm gonna make menus look nice. I'm gonna make it so that, and like a lot of stuff that I would have used JavaScript on the front end for previously, we don't have to do anymore because CSS has given us all kinds of extra features that didn't used to exist. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I wanted to make a drop-down menu, I would have like a hidden div that had a UL in it and had display none, and when I moused over a word, it would make that div pop up and appear. I would have to use JavaScript to do that. Now we can do literally all of that with CSS, so we don't need JavaScript as much anymore. What I will probably use JavaScript for on the front end is a lot of lightweight stuff, things like input validation. So if I don't put, if I don't put Eric in here, right? Let's do that. So let's put it on the blur event, right? So that's when we're leaving the event. Where did we run our blur event? Oh, right here, right on blur. So I'm going to go in here and say if this dot value does not equal Eric, right? I will say, I'll maybe say I'm gonna put a message document. You must put in Eric. You must put in Eric. Lowercase e. And then I'm gonna say, this dot style dot background color equals pink. And then I'm also going to use this dot focus, which is a function that is basically calling the focus event, but it's going to manually move my cursor back to it, right? And maybe we can go in here and clear it out as well. This dot value equals nothing, right? So if I let's take out this line of code too, right? So if I type in anything, right, it works. If I type in ASDF, is that on the blur? No, on blur. Oh. Int, maybe. Let's do console.log this dot value. Make sure we're in the right spot. Pull up our I have JavaScript turned off. Forgot to turn it back on. Eric, right? Everything works. If I change this to Eric 2, right? It moves it back. This said, hey, no, the focus fired. Let's turn this off too. Right? If you want this input up here, if I put this to anything else, this changes to you must put in Eric, and it changed it to pink. Right? Now it's good, but it's going to force me to put in the right thing. Right? This is kind of a bad practice, right? We don't want to always like force them to be in that box. Okay. But that's the kind of thing I would use JavaScript for. Just lightweight. Lightweight input validation, maybe show some colors, maybe let them know they did something wrong. Other things that I'll use JavaScript for in the front end is like front end specific niceties. Like if I'm going to use a charting library, if I want to have charts and graphs in my program, I'm going to use JavaScript for that. And those JavaScript libraries are going to be like, put in an array of values and we'll chart it over time. There's tons and tons of really good charting libraries like JavaScript charting library. Right, like D3 is a good one. Right, NVD3. Yep. So you can make all these. These are all JavaScript charts. So I'm going to use JavaScript on the front end to do fancy stuff like this, and the back end is where all the cool stuff is actually happening. That's where I'm storing stuff in the database. That's where I'm actually checking the values to make sure that they're correct. Like on this example where we're saying, hey, the value has to be Eric. Okay, well, if JavaScript is turned off, it doesn't prevent me from submitting garbage. So I'm still going to verify in the back if that's a rule. If this has to be a phone number and it has to be 10 digits long. Okay, well then on the back end, I'm going to make sure that it's 10 digits long and it's actually a phone number. So there's a lot of things that you would have done previously with JavaScript to make your website more robust and to feel more lively. I maybe won't do so much anymore. Maybe the only exception is if I was building something extremely simple that was intended to be local only, right? And we're going to learn about session storage and local storage this week. So every one of our browsers has kind of like a mini database inside of it, so we can store data into it. If I'm building something just for me, I don't want to have a server. I don't want to bring that into the place. I might just build a single page application just for myself, maybe like a weight tracker or a fitness. Like how many laps did I run today? I don't need to store that stuff on a server. I'm not trying to build it as a company. I'm just building something for my own benefit. I would do it the simplest possible way, and that might be entirely with JavaScript on the front end. We can do lots of really cool things with JavaScript on the front end, this is quite a bit of bias from me, so take this with a grain of salt. I love back-end programming. I think that's where all the fun happens, right? My entire career over 20 years is mostly as a full-stack developer. So I'm going to build the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end just to create the environment, right? This is like the UI for what I'm doing in the back end. The back end's where all the magic happens. And we're going to get into back end. That's like the whole second half of this class. But we have to have the fundamentals of the front end first so you can actually make nice UIs. So that when you click on this, it turns the box purple, and when you click on that, it turns it pink. Go ahead, Josh.
So these like external libraries, like you mentioned with like creating graphs.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Do you just download this whole library and
Yeah, I mean,
and you just put it right into your...
All of them are going to have different instructions. So you're going to, like, a big part of being a software engineer is you're going to read a bunch of documentation because everybody does things differently. So I would probably go to, it's even telling you, getting started. Right? So I'm going to download this file. Oh, I can copy it directly from here. I can put it in my page. Okay. Put it directly in my page. Maybe I even put this as defer so that it doesn't try to do anything. And then it's telling you I can use it. Maybe there's some quick examples. I don't know. Let's try this. Let's make a paragraph tag in here so it can work on something. Something for D3. And let's put in some code in here. Right. So let's move this actually down. Right. So what did the code say? I don't know what this means. Let's just copy the whole thing. Let's put it in here. Okay. So let's run our code and see if... Yeah, so now it's putting some information here, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. I don't... It's doing that, whatever that is, right? So if I wanted to make a chart, or if I wanted to make... I'd maybe examples gallery. Click on one of these. Yeah, they're showing you here. Here's the code.
You're on a different screen.
What?
We can't see it.
It's right here. Do you see this browser?
I think it's frozen. I can't see anything. I'm seeing your...
I'll try resharing. Yeah, let me know if any weird bugs like that pop up. Do you see this screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I did was I just went back, like they have an examples gallery. So I would come in here and be like, oh, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And so they give you the code. Right? And so maybe I would just paste that into my app and see how it works, right? So, you'd have to, so they're expecting us to have an element that has a chart and then an SVG inside of it. And then we paste in this data that we get from this value. So, it's fairly easy to use third-party libraries like this. A great example that I'm using right now, timeago.js, right? This is a really good one, right? We copy in this library, we put it in our page, and then whenever we put in the timeago.format, right, it will do stuff with dates, right? So this will say like 5 seconds ago or 15 minutes ago or 25 minutes ago. Like you see it on Twitter and in timelines and stuff. This is really good for timeline views where it's like you've got a date value and you want to display sometime in the past, right? So if we were to, I think we can even use it here, right? More tools. Console, right? Go ahead.
I think it froze again, or is it just me?
Can you see my screen moving?
No.
Oh man, this can drive me crazy.
Your connection is kind of weak.
Oh, that's not good. Maybe I'll turn off my camera, or maybe we need to take a break and I can reboot my router or something. Yeah, let's do that. It's 5:30. Let me reboot my router and see if we can get better internet quality, because otherwise this is going to be a really painful day of class for everybody. So it's 5:30. Let's meet back at 5:45. Cool. Okay. So let's take a look at all the different types of events that we have available to us, and just kind of explore them as we go. Right. So I'm going to go back to this page. Right. We've been looking at Click. Click is like the most default event. You're probably going to use this all the time. Click is the mouse down and mouse up combined. A full click. Let's take this out. Whatever that's doing. All right. So let's actually make a new. Let's make a new page maybe. So let's go mouse events.html. Okay. So I'm going to make a page where we can explore all this together. Mouse events. And I'm going to make a big div here called div event div id equals event log. Let's give it a little bit of a style here. Style. Let's say event log background color 999 border mpx solid black. Okay, and close our style. Okay, let's make a new script. Script source equals JS mouse events.js. Okay. We'll put all of our code for the mouse events in there. New file, mouse events.js. We want to defer this. Defer. All right. So let's add a document.body, and we'll do add event listener. And we will first we're going to track click function. Here, let's make a reference to that event log. Var event log equals document dot get element by ID event log. Right. So anywhere on the body, we're going to track a click event, and we can simply go event log dot inner HTML equals event log dot inner HTML. Let's put the new event on top. Right. So let's say here, let's make this an unordered list. All right, we'll just wrap it like this. We'll say div click. Right. So every time I click on this page, if we go to mouse events HTML, right, we should, yeah, perfect. We should see these are the click events firing. Let's give this a min height. Let's say 100 view height. Let's do 90 view height, and we'll do overflow auto. Overflow is when we run out of space, it's going to put scroll bars in here for us. Okay, so as we track our events, right, we get a scroll bar, everything's good. Max height, 99 view height. Cool. All right. So that's a click event. What if we wanted to in our event see where did I actually click on the page, right? So we could do that with the event element, right? The event object, and if we console.log this, console.log event, we can take a look at those coordinates, right? So if we look here, right, we can get client X, client Y, so we can say click, and we'll put in plus event.client X plus comma plus event.client Y plus, right? Okay, so now as we click, we're getting our coordinates, our X and Y coordinates showing us where we are on the screen. Right, so if I click up here, right, on 8:13, okay. Let's add this actually to document so that it will work everywhere on the page, right? So if I'm in the very topmost left corner of the page, right, that's 0, 0. If I'm all the way over here, it's 1,102, 0. If I'm all the way down here, however big the viewport is, 299. If I make this bigger, right, now it's 619. So these coordinates are one way that we can know where we are, right? So then another thing we can do, right, we can add a document.add event listener mouse move. Right? The mouse move is going to do exactly what you would think it would do. It's going to move, it's going to register every movement of our mouse. So let's take this same element, let's make a div id equals mouse chords div, and every time we do a mouse move, I'm going to say document.getElement by id mouse chords inner HTML equals event.client Y plus comma plus event.client X first, then Y. Okay. So as we move around the page, you'll notice that our coordinates are updating in real time. Right? That's pretty cool, huh? So then, right, if I click, right, that's the click event. I can add also, right, a click event is actually two separate events combined as one, right? Event listener, and I'm going to say mouse down, function, event. Okay. I'm going to put in my thing here, and I'm going to make a div id equals down div, and we're going to add a I'm going to say down is going to be float left, right? And we'll do mouse chords is float left. Okay, and we'll on event log we'll say clear both so that those stay up top. Clear both. Okay, so let's make this a little cleaner so you guys can see the CSS better. Okay, good. All right. So now we've got a thing up there, but as soon as I do the mouse down, right, if I capture a mouse down event, I can say document.getElement by id down dot inner HTML equals down, and then there is a mouse up document.add event listener inner mouse up function event, and I'm going to say in here I'm going to take out down, right? So if I'm pressing the mouse button, it's going to have the word down in here, right? You see that it says down there, and as soon as I let go, down is going to disappear And then the click event is going to fire, and we're going to see the word click appear right here, right? I just released. So the mouse click event is a combination of the mouse down followed by a mouse up. Does that make sense? Let's add a margin left. NPX. Okay. So we can control and track what we're doing, right? If I wanted to, I could use the on mouse down thing combined with mouse move, right? Let's make a variable. Bar is mouse down, and we'll make that false. So when I press mouse down, I'm going to say is mouse down equals true, and when mouse up goes in here, I'm going to say is mouse down equals false again. Okay, so now I've created a true or false value. Now inside my mouse move, let's see, what can we do interesting? I mean, we could do a document.create element span. Let's var pen equals. Okay, then I'm going to say pen dot style dot position equals absolute. Pen dot style dot top equals event dot client x. Pen dot style dot left equals event dot client y. And then we can say document dot body dot append pen. Right, so every single time we move our mouse while it's down, we are creating a bunch of let's give it a background color. Pen dot style dot background color equals blue. And then we probably need to say pen dot style dot height equals 1 px. Pen dot style dot width equals 1 px. Maybe it'd be better if we made this 2 pixels so we can see it a little bit better. And maybe we say pen dot style dot display equals inline block. Right, so we're creating an element, we're setting a position to equal the client x and y, and we're going to do that only when we're moving the mouse and it's down. So let's say if is mouse down, right? So if that's true, we want to create a pen element and put it around the page. Let's actually make this a div. Okay. And let's actually put this in document.get element by ID. Let's do. This should work. If we inspect, do we have our elements being put in here? Why are we not seeing colors? Yeah, we got all of them in here. We probably have to put some content in there, huh? Position absolute. Where are these going in? Oh, they're all going in the same spot. Position absolute. Oh, top and left are not showing up. Why are top and left not showing up? That's interesting. So it's creating them, but it's putting them at the bottom and not putting a top and left. Top. 5px. Left. Oh, you know what? Client y. We have to put in px. Plus px. Right, so we put an invalid. Right? Yeah, so you can see I'm drawing. Oh, I got my coordinates maybe backwards. Client y, client x. Perfect. So now I'm drawing elements on the screen. This is a really inefficient way to do it, but I'm saying when my mouse is down, I'm treating it like a pen, and I'm drawing elements and putting them in place because I've captured the mouse down and I set a value, and I captured the mouse up and set a value, and so while I'm dragging, I'm putting elements in the place of the client x and client y coordinates. Okay. Pretty cool, huh? And we did that with what, like 15 lines of code and a couple of simple mistakes that got us here? All right, so that's mouse down, mouse move, right? Is an event that fires literally every time our mouse has moved inside of our document. What else do we have? What other cool events do we have? We have, if we for some reason wanted to track double clicks, that was an event that was available to us. This event really stopped being super useful way back in like the Windows 95 era, when, if you guys remember, like you double clicked to open apps. At that time, we thought, hey, maybe you double click inside of websites to do things as well. Hardly anybody uses this anymore, and if you had that as a behavior, I don't necessarily even think your users would know how to use that, right? Double click is like one of the most complicated mouse specific events that you'll see in all of computers. Mouse enter, mouse leave. We kind of talked about that in the early stages of when we were looking at it with the attribute way, but that says whenever this mouse enters this element, right, this event will fire. It'll fire only one time, when it is first entering from outside, right? So if we put a box in here, go ahead.
Can you scroll to the JS, the mouse stuff with the X and the Y? Right there. Okay, so you have things called event, and then you're using the name event. Is that like you made up the name event for it to work in the system?
What
like your name variable?
In which line of code specifically?
9 and 10.
Okay, so we have event here.
Yep.
And then we use it here. Yeah. So this is the argument to the function. We can put whatever name we want here. I could call this EV, right? And now all of these will be EV. This is our variable, right? When we write a function, the browser is calling this function and is going to pass us an event object, right? It's going to pass us some argument. And if we were to take a look at...
So in a sense, function is like var naming the thing, just in a different way, in a different process. Yeah, does that make sense?
This is an anonymous function. We have not given it a name. I could have written this exact function and called it like function handle click, right? And then literally have that be this is the function signature. This is the code of the function. I can put handle click right here.
Okay. And then the word event could be something else also.
Yep. This can be Eric for all we care, right? We get to choose the name of the argument because the browser is going to call this function and it's going to pass this argument to us. But what we call it inside of our function, as long as we use that same name over and over and over again, or everywhere inside that we have, right, we're good.
And so you just used event just because it's an event.
Just because it's the event object. Generally, when I'm writing code for myself, I'm going to put like EV or even sometimes E because I'm super lazy, right? One letter is better than 5, right? And so I'll say console.log e.clientx. And you'll see this pretty frequently in code, right? Where people are writing event handlers. They'll use E or EV or event just as a way to let you know what it is. I have seen some programs, some libraries, that will name it the type of event that it is, right? So if this is a click, right, they would just call it click. So that you know, click.
Yeah, it just confused me because there's some where it's like the specific names and you can't use them because they're used with the system, and then
event is
these ones are
specific
named events, but you can still use the word event. So it's okay. That helped me understand that better.
The only ones that you can't use are the ones on this list. These are the only words that are illegal for you to use in JavaScript because they already have a purpose, like function. Where's that at? Right here. Like, you can't make a variable called function because function is a word that means, hey, the next thing that comes up is the name of a function. You can't use do, catch, while. All of the things we've been learning in the language portion of this class mean something to JavaScript. But literally everything else, when you see like light blue in your editor or whatever color theme you have, that is a word we have picked. Same with these functions, right? Like handle click here. That's our name.
And then client X, client Y, are those reserved?
Or they're not reserved. They just are a property of this client of this object that we called click, right? So when we console.log click here, right? Click. When we call this object, we're logging it to the console, right? It's the pointer event that's actually being passed in, right? It's not just an event. This is a pointer event. And so
so client X and client Y, they are words that tell
of
it to.
this pointer event.
Okay. Kind of like math.random and
Yep.
tilt X and stuff. You just put it in there and they say this is what it is.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly right. And that's why when I'm doing development, when I'm doing JavaScript stuff, I will be inside my console, my developer console here, all day long, because I don't remember all these things. I just know that they're in here. And so I'll just expand it out and be like, okay, what do I need to do to get to the right value? It's telling us this is a type of click. If we had some kind of if this was a joystick event that had accelerometers, maybe there's a tilt X and a tilt Y. There's all kinds of stuff that can be tracked in JavaScript as an event. We're just going to scratch the surface. If you look at this page, right? These are all the possible events, like this entire list here. These are all the possible events you can use in JavaScript, including like if you copy something to the clipboard, there is a copy event, so you can know that the user is copying. You can
are a lot of the are those used regularly, or are there some that aren't really used anymore?
It's going to completely depend on what you're building. If you're building a text editor like Google Docs, or you want to build something like that, maybe you use cut and copy all the time. If you're building,
so all of them are used just dependent on what you're building.
Yeah, most of the time, 90% of what I do is a click event, right? Most of the time, or sometimes I'll do a drag, or drag over, or drag enter, just depending on what I'm building. Like if I was doing, like on our to-do list, for example, that we were kind of playing with yesterday, I might want to make it so that I can click one of these things, drag it up so that it has a different place in this list, like reordering. So then I would use one of the drag events, or I would do a mouse down plus a drag to reshuffle this unordered list. It's completely dependent on what you're trying to build, what functionality you're trying to go for. All of these events are important. They all have a place. But when you use them is going to be completely dependent on what it is you're trying to do.
Okay.
Good question. And so this page is extremely valuable because, if you want to do anything that you can do inside of a browser, anything you've ever seen before, has been written at some point with JavaScript, right? So popping up a notification box, or, building a chat system like Facebook has built in, right? Where it's doing, that's all JavaScript. So if you wanted to build something, chances are that there's something in the documentation that will point you in the right direction of what event you need to at least look for and do stuff on. These are just the user-specific events as well. When we learn about XHR, XML-HTTP requests later on, that has its own event listeners where there's a ready state change and there's onloaded and all kinds of stuff. Events, and when we get into ES6 and when we get into Node.js, we might write our own events entirely, right? We can create events that says like when a document is saved, right? And we're going to watch for when that document saved thing has been fired. JavaScript is based around the idea of we're going to write some code that is going to subscribe to an event. We're going to pass it a function. That function will be called when this event occurs. This is the entirety of what makes JavaScript cool. It's kind of an asynchronous programming language where it's waiting for something to happen.
Okay, and add event listener, you've explained it to me before and I've looked it up. That goes at the beginning of something and it says listen for this thing to happen and then do all of this when it happens?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so any element that exists in your page, whether it's document itself, which is our top level kind of page element, or we specifically select an element like document that get element by ID, the down option, right? Any element can have an event listener attached to it. And then the first argument is the event to watch for, and then the second argument is a function to run. Right? So we could have made it look like this, kind of, if we wanted to show it as like all one line. Right? Like this is the first argument. This entire function is the second argument. Because what it's doing is this add event listener function has this big queue of events in the background, right? Every second that you're on a page, all these events are firing all the time. And you're basically subscribing to this event, and you're saying, hey, when this event happens, please run this piece of code for me. Does that make sense to everybody? Think of it like a newspaper.
It's kind of like on pause until somebody clicks it or rolls over it or something.
No, the event is always happening, literally
Okay.
every second. But when we tell it add event listener, we're saying, hey, when this event happens on an element that I am watching, right? In this case, we're using documents, so it's going to happen on every element in the page. But if we put it on a specific document, it's going to say, this event is always firing, mouse move is always going. When it happens on an element that I care about, please run this code for me. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this correctly too. So the function, the argument is event, and that event we have defined as mouse down. Is that correct? So you're saying, hey, so the function that you have highlighted. No, the function says function event. Yes.
Okay.
So the argument in there is event, correct?
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be named this. We were just kind of talking about that earlier. This is whatever name we want it to be, right? It can be my event, right? It can be the letter E. It can be whatever we want it to be. It's just that when this function is called by the browser, it's always going to pass an event object as the first argument. It's always passing that, regardless of what you call it. And if you guys remember yesterday, or gosh, whenever we learned about functions, right? If I didn't put event in here, let's say I call console.log arguments, right? And let's go back to this page, right? So I'm going to do my mouse up. The arguments array has a mouse event as its only argument, right? So argument 0 is a mouse event. Then there's a pointer event, which is the click, right? All these events always exist. They're always running all the time in the background. Like when your browser is up, this code is running continuously looking for events, right? All the things that happen by default, like clicking on a link takes you to a page, submitting a form submits the form. These events, when I move my mouse around, I'm watching these coordinates because we added an event listener to it, but the mouse is moving around regardless of us watching that event. Our function that we pass in here as the actual event listener is telling the browser, hey, when you see this event that I have subscribed to, when I've added an event listener, right, like that, the name means what it's doing, saying, I want you to listen for this event and tell me when it happens. We are writing a callback function that will run.
And the add event listener would be listening for the mouse down thing.
Mouse down event.
Okay. Yep. And then the function argument event, and then it'll do that.
Yep. And that's if you need the event, right? I'm not even using the event argument in here. I could take this out. Still work. This code works perfectly. If I need the event, right, where I'm trying to get like the X and Y coordinates or any of those things, then I have to either name it, or if I wanted to, I could do arguments 0 dot client X, arguments 0 dot client Y. Same here. Right? The event object is being passed to our function regardless of if we give it a name or not. The browser is just saying, I'm calling this function, I'm passing you a thing. If we didn't give it a name, it's still there. Arguments 0. Right?
Josh, does that answer your question?
I'm still.
Yeah, I think the only thing I was confused about at first was when you originally wrote that with the argument, you didn't define the argument, right? So you just had events in there, but nothing was. There wasn't a value given to it, so that's where I was getting hung up. But it makes sense. I understand that now. That's why I kept thinking you had to do that, but you don't have to. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, if you remember back to when we were talking about functions, this function, let's call handle click for example. This function is defined, but it will not be called until someone. If we were to write code in here and say handle click, right? We're calling it now, right, like this. And if I was to call this, right, I can call. Oop, I always press the wrong stupid button. Okay, I lost my browser. Hold on. All right. Right. So handle click is a function. right? We wrote this. That is getting called anytime I click anywhere on this page. But I could also, at any time, call handle click, right? Oh, it's trying. See, it's trying to say cannot read properties of undefined because we wrote handle click to say, hey, I'm going to get the client X, client Y. I can simulate this, right? I can say handle click, and I could put in a client X is 12,000. Client Y is 1 million. Right? It's putting that in there. The event object that the browser is giving us is all the stuff that the browser knows about the event. But our code inside this function just cares about, does it have a client X and a client Y property? That's all we're checking. So, it's just behind the scenes, just simple JavaScript. It's all the stuff that we've learned over the last week already. Like it's just passing an object in here that has some properties. We can either choose to use them or not.
So is it best practice then when you are creating a function just to put a argument in there, even if you don't define that argument? Like you said, event or E or EV. You don't necessarily put that in there at all.
You don't. I would generally. I don't know if I really understand your question fully, but like if I was writing an event handler, if I'm not going to use any of the event object stuff in there, I wouldn't even include an argument. Like on these ones down here.
I think he was talking about the function where you were naming the function right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
when
you
put EV in there.
Yeah, I wouldn't
you were putting
on this one because I'm not
okay.
using that value in this function.
Okay, because we were talking like you could name an event EV, E, or like if you wanted to be lazy. I know you were joking around, but like, so you wouldn't even have to name it at all.
I wouldn't even include it. I would like if I'm not using it, and you'll notice like these are all like a light blue, and I don't know if you see like as soon as I type this, it turns to like a gray blue, and it's even saying it's declared, but its value is never read. It's saying that I've never used that value in here, so why bother? I wouldn't include it. It doesn't hurt it if it does. Go ahead.
So when do we know? Okay, this is for me because when do I know? Because that's what got me with the bulls, whatever in the homework. When do I know to put a value in the function, or name the value in the function, and when not to? Like now, you don't have to name it, but when do I have to name it?
When you're going to use that value inside the function.
So if that was like a 3 or 9 or something like that.
Would it be like the one you have above with the pen?
Yeah. So I'm using the event object. I need the client X. I need the client Y. So rather than writing out arguments like this, I need it. I need that value. So I would maybe call EV, and instead of having this, I would be EV. Right? I need the value the browser is telling us so I can figure out where my mouse is. I have to have it. So I would put this in there when I need to use it inside my function. Like this is the code that's actually running when the mouse is moving. That function requires that X and Y value the browser's giving us. So I need it. If I wasn't using that value, like in these down here, I don't need it. I don't need to put it in. Does that make sense? It's hard to give you like, I don't know if this concept is the one that you're struggling with. Is that these functions are like super important to being able to be a programmer. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, it's like typically like in every language when you use functions, you want to give them a name so you can call them later, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have something to call it by.
So these are anonymous functions. They specifically don't have a name.
Right.
We're talking, I think, just about the arguments that go into the function. So
okay,
argument is in here,
okay.
Like argument 1, right? Argument 1 is the event object, and if I was to console.log, right? Console.log argument 1, right? When I mouse up, I broke something up here. Wait, man. I need to put it in here quick. mouse up, right? Mouse up, comma. Okay. So when I am using this argument inside the function, right, like the name of the argument that I put in here inside these parentheses is the name I'm going to use to refer to that argument inside my curly brackets, inside the function. So when I'm writing a function, if I need a value that I'm passing to it, I'll put that name in here so that it will be the same as me saying, right, that's argument 1, me saying var argument 1 equals arguments 0. The arguments array is always being passed to the function. What us putting a name in here is doing is simply saving us this step of declaring this variable in this function. Does that make sense?
So you can name all of them, just you don't always have to name all of them.
Yes. This function will run regardless. So now this function won't run because I'm using argument 1, and if I was to mouse up, it's going to say argument 1 is not defined.
Okay, so if we were to use the variable var argument 1 equals argument bracket 0, right? Mm-hmm. The shortcut for that is just naming function parentheses argument 1. That's a shortcut for that.
Yep. And it tells other programmers, hey, when you call this function, like it doesn't make sense for an anonymous function like this, but if I'm reading this code, okay, I know this function handle click is expecting some argument called click, and that's probably, I can see here that it needs at least a client X and it needs a client Y. Those are the two things we're using out of that. And so that's why shorthand for this is, most of the time I'm going to put event or EV or E. It's because I know that this is just going to pass me an event object.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Great questions. Almost all the time on these, I'll just say one more thing, right? Like, if you do it wrong, the error is going to come to your console and it's going to say, click is not defined. You click on this line of code, it's going to show you, oh, okay, this variable has not been created. It's going to kind of tell you what's wrong. What were you going to say, Josh?
Can you go back to your code? Mm-hmm. So like on line 4, the function, so you say handle click and then the argument is event. And so when it runs that function, it's getting that argument below where it says event.clientX. That's the value that's going to be put in there.
Yeah, event is an object. And when we log this to the screen, right, these are all the properties that come along with it. So we're just grabbing the client X and the client Y values.
Okay,
yeah.
That makes sense.
And the browser is what is creating this for us, right? When we say add event listener, when this click happens, the browser is making that beautiful object with all that stuff in there for us, and it's passing it to our function. Go ahead, Selena.
What is the difference between function on line 12 and function on line 4?
Function on line 12 and function on line 4. This one is a named function. We created this as a named function. This is an anonymous function. The only difference is this one has a name and this one does not.
Okay. But it has a little...
Yeah. These are both still functions, right? They both execute code. They're both callable. But this one has a name. How would
you use that first one with handle click?
Right here, like this. I'm saying click and then putting handle click in here. I could have, instead of doing handle click like this, I could have written this as an anonymous function by saying event and then literally pasting in these lines of code.
Okay. So it's kind of like naming it and defining it and then using it later on.
Yep. Anonymous is like a one-time use thing, right? We're creating this function and passing it to add event listener all at the same time. I can never reuse this function. The only person that knows about this function is the event listener we created. If I want to reuse it for any reason, right, like this. So I want to use that function here, handle click, right? Right. So the browser is right here. Right. The browser has that's what's causing this click thing to happen. But if I, for whatever reason, I wanted to call handle click, right, as long as I pass an object with a client X, and a client Y value, right, that function is reusable for us. We can keep using it over and over and over again. If I had made that anonymous, I cannot call this function. I wouldn't do that. It only exists in the place we made it. And this is just like the old-fashioned, like this is old school syntax for this, right? We could also have written this as var handle click equals function event. I'm gonna paste these lines of code in here. Right? These are synonyms, right? This is still an anonymous function, but now we're saying, hey, the anonymous function belongs inside the variable handle click. We could, right? Like, this is the same thing. Our code will still work the same way. And if we go to, right, see the click is working. Now I can call handle click, and if we just write it by itself, it shows you the code, and I can still say handle click. Well, let's do that one, right? I can call this as many times as I want. Don't get so much hung up on the syntax, because there's lots of ways to write things. It's more important that you guys understand the concept, and I think we're finally starting to get it. The argument here is a shorthand for me saying var event equals arguments 0.
Knowing how, when we see it and they all look different, to me in my head it looks like they're all different things, but now that it's explained, we can tell that they're all the same thing, just written differently.
Yeah.
And so that makes more sense to
exactly right. And it's kind of like with names, right? Like Eric Harrison is the exact same person as Harrison, Eric, which is the exact same person as E. Harrison, right? Like, you can write my name 15 different ways. They're all valid. Which way you choose to write it is going to depend on who your audience is, what you're trying to get across. You have a lot of flexibility in how you write, how you can be understood. Like, for example, when I'm writing add event listeners like this, almost always I'm going to just use an anonymous function, because I very rarely want to call the function over and over again outside of the context of an event, right? Like, if it's a click event handler for me, I'm not calling handle click in my code other places. The only place that I care about the click event handler being written is when I actually do a click. So I'm almost always going to write it in this type of syntax, where I just make an anonymous function and shove it into the click event. Cool. That was good. Good discussion. Any other questions? All right. So we kind of saw with that previous page right here, right? We have some inputs here, right? One of the things that you might want to do when you're working with forms and you're allowing them to be submitted is that you will want to clear out the values, right? So where were we? Submit. Perfect. What did I put? I put it in the blur, didn't I? Yep. So this is the way you do this, right? So any input you wanted to be able to clear, right? Let's say, let's actually put a couple in here. Let's put, right, good. So make, right, good. Let's say, last name, I don't know, email address. This would be last name. Great. So I've got 3 events in here, or 3 elements in here. Let's just add some lines between them. Good. Let's take this up. So generally, what you'll probably want to do when we start building actual applications that submit things, maybe with Ajax, is that we'll be in our submit handler, our submit listener, and we'll probably prevent the default, and we will probably go through and clear out our inputs so that we don't leave, right? If I was to come in here and type in, Eric something Harrison, right? And I click submit, right? That's supposed to be an email address, me at ericharrison.info, right? And I click submit, right? The submitting is happening behind the scenes, but the values are still in here. We want to be able to show the user, hey, this was submitted, right? And so we would probably do something like, document.getElement by ID, username, then we had last name, then we had email, right? Email address, last name. And the way to clear out values in here, right, we use the dot value property, and we just set it to an empty string. So dot value equals empty string. Equal dot value empty string. So now when we type some stuff in here, okay, and I click submit, everything goes poof. So we can start building in some really elegant user interfaces. Maybe what we also want to do is when these values are, right, like maybe when we submit this form, maybe this is like for data entry, right? You can imagine this is like create a new customer record, right? And you're building an application for, a data center where you're typing in first name, last name, credit card number, all that information. When you click submit, maybe we want it to go right back up to this element so that I'm ready to start typing again, right? And so then we can say document.getElement by ID username .focus. And focus is a method that will let us basically call the focus event on the browser. And we're saying, hey, focus on this element. All right, so if I type some stuff in here now, and I click submit, it goes right back to here, so I'm ready to type. And I can be really efficient with my data entry now, with just like 4 lines of code. Because we're clearing out the previous form values, and we're going back to the start. You can imagine for people who are really good at typing, they love this kind of interface. I get mad when the browser takes me to another page or does something like if I'm here on doing data entry, I'm expected to put in, shopping list items or something. Like, let me keep typing. Let me keep my hands on my keyboard. Any questions about that? That's kind of just best practice stuff. Submit, we went over submit. We kind of talked about key down, key up, key press, focus. But let's go back here. Let's make a new page, and we'll just call this keyboard events. New file, key events. HTML. And we'll make a key events. JS. Okay. Key events. Keyboard. And we'll probably even just copy some of this stuff in here, right? Mouse events. This is pretty good code. Boop, boop. Right? Key events. Cool. And we'll call key events. So let's just say key code. Yeah, cool. All right. So with keyboard events, right, we have a couple of specific keyboard combinations that we would probably want to look at, right? So let's just do add event listener key press, right? So key press is the key down and key up at the same time. So that's like the full click of a key, right? So it's just like mouse. It's just like click is a combination of mouse up and mouse down, right? It only fires on mouse up. Key press is the full press. And so if we say function, we'll put in an event. Okay. Let's just take a look at this key object because it's got some. The event object has so you know how the mouse event had X and Y coordinates and all that stuff. Well, the keyboard event is going to have like key codes and like what letter was pressed down, right? So let's just log this and take a look and see what we have here. So we come here and we say key events.html, right? Let's pull up in our console. Okay, I'm going to press like the letter A here. And we see we get a keyboard event. And we can see that we don't have a client X, we don't have a client Y. But what we do get is we get a key, which has the letter A. We get the key code, which is like the ASCII integer symbol. 97 is like the lowercase letter A. We get a type key press. We get some which. This is also 97. Right? It's the same as this key code up here. We get a code that says key A. So let's just type in some more. So I'm going to press shift right now. Right? Shift is also a. Or let's press I'm going to press A, but I'm going to press Shift A, right? So you'll see, watch this key spot here, right? So Shift is considered a modifier key, right? So now the character code is 65. 97 was lowercase a. What is 97 minus 26? 71. That's interesting. So there, oh, because we got like some extra characters and stuff. So if we actually look at ASCII key codes, right? This is what is actually happening behind the scenes. Oh gosh, that's so small. Right, so this is kind of when you press A, right? Uppercase A, that's key code 65. When you press lowercase a, that's key code 97. Because we got extra characters in there, right? So these are the 26 plus left bracket, / right close bracket, some of these extra characters. But all of these key codes coordinate with like what is the actual letter that's going to pop out when you hit a key press. Right? So space, for example, is 32. If we were to come in here and look at this in our page, right? You see it's key space. The code is space, but if you look at the char code, it's 32. So all of that information, anything we need to do to control keyboard events, is available to us in the event object passed to a keyboard event function. If we did, for example, document.add event listener key down function event, right? Let's put this in, we'll do console.log as well, event. Right, I'm going to press and hold A. All those events are firing the entire time I have A pressed down. Right? And if I was to say document.add event listener key up function event, and let's put in some kind of console.log key up, right? Big bold letters, and then we'll say console.log event. Right? Let's press A and then boop. It sends one final event, right? This final event that is being sent is telling you what key was pressed, right? So now it's saying char code is 0, whereas before the char code was 97, but now it's 0 because it's no longer pressed. And you'll also notice that if you look at one of these ones that is going in here, right, we have this repeat that is false, we have return value true, we have timestamps in here, so there's a whole bunch of event-specific things related to keyboard events that we can track and monitor and watch, right? So we can build an entire application that lets us just type anywhere we want, right? So I could come in here and say, key press, let's just say document.getElement by ID, what do we call it, event log. Inner HTML equals document.getElement by ID event log inner HTML plus what do we got? What is it? Key. Yeah, let's do plus event.key. Right? So now I can type as if I'm a keyboard. Okay. Right? So that it's like full keyboard input. Now, if we were trying to actually make this a text editor, we'd want to be able to do stuff with like when I hit enter, right? I want to replace that with, a line break, right? So maybe what we do is we come in here and say var value equals event.key if, or maybe we do switch value, and we do case enter value equals br break. Okay. Oh, and I need to replace this here. Right, so I'm going to say value equals this. So now our application will understand enter keys. Right? Right? So anything we want to control, we can do this by capturing these key press events. Key down, key up, right? And if we were to do, right, since key down lets us write this a whole bunch of times, just like we would if we were in a text editor. But now we still have all these extra ones like Control, Alt, Tab, right? Like all those things, we would want to capture those, and we probably even want to do, like you'll notice, if I press tab, for example, it's moving this little cursor. I don't know if you guys can see that on the screen. It's like selecting different elements of my browser, because tab is a special character that we're trying to control things. So probably we'd want to come in here and say event.prevent default, so that the browser doesn't steal my keystrokes. There you go. Now it's not doing that anymore. I can tab to my heart's content. This is not a text input. This is a div, right? Div event log that we're treating like it's a typewriter. And maybe what we want to do is, if I do Control B, right? If I do, right? Let's change this. Case Control do nothing. So just say break. We don't want to even. Maybe we'll do even return. Great. So if I press Control right now, it's not doing anything. But we can make a key code that says Control B puts me into like bold mode. Now I can wrap everything in a strong tag. Or we could toggle bold on and off, maybe put some elements up here. Lots of cool options for us here, all from keyboard events. It's similar to mouse event. It uses the same, right? We're still doing add event listener. We're telling it the event we're doing. Then we're passing in the actual function that will run. But the event object that's being passed to us has different values in it. And it's going to have letters and all that kind of sort of stuff. Any questions? Keyboard events. We already talked about focus. Focus is the event that lets you, like when you enter an input, that's the focus event firing. You can also manually cause it to fire by calling it as a function. Right? That's how we go to that element when we were looking at those inputs. Paste, input, and change. Those are other event types where you can copy what is being pasted. You can copy what is being changed. Let's play with that real quick. So let's document dot add event listener copy function event. Let's just see what even goes in here. I've never used these, so let's say console.log event, and let's just see what happens when we copy something. Let's type in some words. Good. And I'm going to copy this and do, copy this. So it's doing the clipboard event, and it's, gosh, what is it doing here? Clipboard data. I don't even know how to use this one. There's probably some kind of crazy way, but you can, it's probably this data transfer object. But then we could probably write, right, there's a paste event as well, right? Document. Let's see what that one does. Paste. Right, so I copy some words. That's our copy event. Then we do paste. Okay, now let's do paste. Okay, where's the paste at? Well, probably because it's not a input. Let's put an input on this page and see if we can get this to fire. So we're getting the copy to work. Now let's paste. Yeah, we got a paste event. I don't know what this data transfer object is doing. Items. I don't know if it shows us the value that was pasted anywhere. Might be protected. Go ahead.
I wrote text. I copied it.
Let me see. Oh, event clipboard data. Get. Oh, you have to call some special function on it. Get data.text. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a complicated one. This one didn't exist. This is a relatively new event for us that wasn't a part of the language for the longest time. I've never had to build like a full text editor where I care about copying and pasting like this. So I don't know if I'd ever need to use this, but if I did, you know, my reaction would be to go to W3 Schools or some of these places and go to JS paste event, right? And just read about how to use it, read about what it's doing, right? Because there's so much stuff that you're going to do in software development that all that matters is, can you look it up on the internet and can you read it and figure out how to apply it? That's the entirety of the job.
So using these keyboard events is sort of how keyloggers work, right? The software keyloggers.
For the ones that are running on your computer, yes, but they're running as like a process, like a regular window or a regular application. All of these keyboard events only apply, like if you notice I'm typing right now, if I was to click on my browser, I clicked on my desktop, so my window is no longer active, nothing is typing. These only fire when the browser is active, when you're in here. Like a traditional keylogger on a computer needs to be running as a program on the computer so they can capture all those events.
Okay.
But this is how Windows works behind the scenes, right? Like the browser is just getting keyboard commands sent to it from Windows or from Mac. So our operating system is saying, hey, there's an interrupt. Eric pressed the letter A. Is anyone active? And the browser says, hey, I'm active right now. Let me have that keyboard event. And so then it says, okay, Eric pressed the letter A. Are there any event listeners on this page that care about keyboard events? And then our code says, yes, we want the keyboard events. It's events all the way down from top to bottom. And if we had Notepad open or something and that was the active application, it would be saying, I want all the keyboard events. I want all the mouse events. Go ahead, Josh.
Kind of going off what Karif said. So would this be kind of how like malware or like a phishing attack or phishing whatever, where they send you a link and then are able to record all your keystrokes?
Yeah, that would be like
Like
the
your
program
password
running on your computer. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
In the context of web development, right? You can imagine if we had, let's put it here, right? Let's say input type equals password, ID equals pass, right? So I'm going to make just a simple little password, right? This is a password. Element. Oh, I have prevent default turned on. Let's turn this off real quick. Where's our? Oh, I'm in the wrong file. All right. So if you can imagine, right, this is like one of the dangers of cross-site scripting or code injection, right? This is maybe the Facebook thing where I'm saying, hey, I'm me at erichharrison.info, right? And my password is, super secret password, right? If they were able to inject JavaScript onto this page without Facebook knowing about it, I can capture all of my login information and send it somewhere, maybe, on the page. Because you're just going to the page, we're displaying all this here, right? But they wouldn't do that. They would just silently capture the information. Or what's even more likely is they would probably just go in here and say, on submit, give me the value of the password and ship it off somewhere. So they wouldn't even need to capture the keystrokes because otherwise they'd get all this kind of nonsense. Shift, tab, something, backspace, right? They just really want document dot get element by ID my, what is it called, pass? Is that it? Yeah, dot value. They just want what's in the box. A traditional keylogger, one that runs on your computer, doesn't even know what application you're typing in. So they're just going to log every keystroke you ever hit as like a log. Because they want to get, when you're in a browser, they want to get, your secret document you're typing up in Microsoft Word. They want to know what you're searching on Google. They want everything. If someone was trying to break, if someone was able to inject malicious code into your website, they just want your passwords and your username. So they would just, anytime there's they might even use document.query selector all, and they'll say input type equals password, right? So it says any password element on this page, right? Dot value. So they don't even have to know the name of the element. They're just going to say, if there's a password field, I want it. And that's how There's a whole bunch of extensions like password managers and stuff. That's all they're doing. They're saying if you find a password field, look inside my database for a password that you've stored previously and put it in there. So when you use a password manager, you're trusting the heck out of some third-party company to store your credentials online. Any questions? All right, 6:50. Let's take our last break of the day, and then we'll come back and we'll actually start to put some of this event listeners into practice. We'll keep probably building on our to-do list system from yesterday. So we'll actually add some events, talk about how we would design some events to control this product and make it actually functional and actually cool. Okay, maybe take a look at 2 or 3 different ways to do this. So let's come back at 7:05. Now that we've learned a little bit more about how events are formed, how we use them in our products, to actually take a look at real-world examples rather than like silly things. So we've been working on this to-do list app. We started playing with this yesterday when we were learning about creating elements. So I thought it would be an interesting opportunity for us to write some keyboard events to change and update our lists, right? So if you remember, we got to a state yesterday where we had built this HTML page as like a template, and then as soon as we got to a place where our code, we wrote a render to-do list function that was actually creating all these elements. This was actually what was creating our page, right? So now we need to add some event listeners, so that when we make changes to our data, we want to have it so that like this is a full-featured application. So the first thing that jumps to mind, we already set this up in our data model here, where we said completed equals false. So let's just change one of these to completed equals true, right? We want to be able to say, hey, this is done. So what we'll do is we'll come in here and say, when we're actually looping through our list of items, that if the value is done, we want to add a style of line through, right? So we'll say if list.itemsj.completed, right? So if that's true, because true is, we can just put that in if block. I could have also written this as equals true. Would have done the same thing. But if it's completed, I'm going to simply say list item dot style dot text decoration equals line through. Right? So now we should see on this page, the first one is lined out, right? So, and what I probably actually want to also do, because I want to do this with CSS, is I might want to just say list item dot class list dot add, and maybe we'll say done, right? So instead of writing our code here, we'll make a dot done that will do that for us, right? So list card, right? List item. So we'll do list li dot item dot done, and we'll say text decoration line through, right? And you'll notice the other thing that jumps out now that we're kind of going down this route is that we have this little hover effect that gives us the check mark, right? When we are on one that's done, maybe we want to make it so that this is now like a fully delete, right? I want to fully delete this from the thing. So maybe we change this into a, we'll kind of copy this code from here. We'll say list li.item hover, dot done hover is background color. Maybe we'll make it like a FF9. Let's just select like a light red in here, maybe. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then cursor, pointer, and then we probably want to do this after as well, right? So we'll copy this code. Dot done, and instead of a check mark, maybe we can find like a trash can emoji. Let's see, trash can text emoji. Let's see, maybe this will work. So let's copy this, and we'll paste it into our code here. So now if we look at our to-do list, right? Now I get a trash can, and it turns red because we added this done. But what we need to do is we need to write an event handler that looks at every list item on the page, and it says, hey, if it's got a class of, right, because we have 2 possible classes here, right? We can either have item or item done, right? So anything that is item, we want to make it so that this element will be deletable, right? So let's do exactly that. All right. Let's do this. We're going to create a document dot add event listener. So we're going to watch for any click on the entire page. Event. And when we right, so event dot target is going to be, hopefully an li or something like that, right? So we're going to say var my l equals event dot target. So the first thing we can do is we can say if my l does not equal my l dot class list. Let's see. If my l dot class name does not, how do we want to check this? We want to maybe see if it doesn't contain a value, right? Because class name. Let's just look at any one of these, right? Let's do var l equals document dot query selector all. Or let's just do query selector and do li dot done. Right? That's going to give us our first one. So l dot class name is going to give us item. Maybe we want to do el dot class name dot match, and we say item. Yeah. And if we picked some other el, or we picked some other string, right? So if we had item done, and we say dot match item, that's going to give us a result. But if we said something that didn't exist in that string, it's going to give us null. So we can run dot match, which we're going to learn about as an advanced string function tomorrow. But we can start playing with it now to expose ourselves to it. Match is a function that exists on all strings. So we can say el.classname.match item. So we only want it to work on an item. Right. We can just say, just to make sure that we're in the right spot, we can say, I am clicking an item. Right. So if I click here, I'm clicking an item. That's right. These are LIs as well, but these LIs will all keep that event firing. You can see this number is going up. So what we can do, just right off the bat, right in here we need to say if my el.classname.match has done in it, we want to remove the element. So we can maybe even say, well, let's just do this as a quick right, style.display equals none. Right. So this will delete anyone that is already in there. Right. It's gone now. It's still there behind the scenes, but we've just removed it from the DOM, so it won't be displayed. Otherwise, right. So we're still inside. We've clicked an item. If there is not a done on there, we want to add done. So we can say my l.classList.add done. Right. Now when we reload our page, if I click that, it's now done. Now we've got trash cans that show up. Okay, so that handled that part. But we didn't update the elements in here. So I probably want to give these maybe a unique ID, right? So maybe I'll just put ID equals null, right? And I'll just put an ID value in here. We don't have to do this. We can do this inside of our loop, which I'll show you maybe in a minute. But we're just trying to think of ways to associate the item in this list with the element. We're already looping through it. We could probably just, let's do it that way. We'll do it this way. All right, so when we're looping through this list to render it on the page, right, we already have an index. We already know this is the 0th one, this is the first one, this is the second one. So what we probably want to do is let's add a data set on here. Let's say list item dot data set dot item ID equals J. So if we load our page now and we inspect this element, you'll see that it has a data item ID 1, data item ID 2. So now when we click this element, right, we want to actually remove it or mark it as completed in our variable up here, up at the top, right? So what we just need to do is, okay, if we're clicking it, right, when we're done, we want to completely, right, if completely remove the element from our object array. And then down here, mark the element in our object array as completed, right? The other thing that jumps out is we're going to need to know which list we're in, right? So we can get the data set, we can get the ID, right? This is the second one from, we can get it from the data set attribute that we assigned to this, which is right in here, data item ID. We also probably need list ID, right? So let's do that as well. We have the list ID up here, right? So that's I. So let's come in here and say list item dot data set dot list ID equals I. Okay, so now when we load this page and we look at this, we see this is data item 1 in list ID 0. And if we were to look at one of these other ones, right, this is going to be data item 0 in list ID 1. Right, so now we know which list we're talking about. Okay. So if I needed to see, like, here, let's console.log this, right? Console.log, I will delete the following item, right? And I'll say comma, and then we'll put in, what do we call it? Lists. Yeah, lists. And then we can do myl dot data set list ID. That's the list it's in. And then we'll do myl dot data set dot item ID, because we stored it as an attribute on our element, right? So if I click on this now, we show up the, right? I am clicking on item. Oh, I only put it, right? I will delete the following item, undefined. Why is that not working? Let's see. Maybe because they're not integers. Yeah, these are strings, right? So if I was to do this, console.log myl.dataset.list ID, right? These are, right? It's saying 0 here, but it's actually, if we did type of, let's do type of, right? String. But these are arrays, so these are integers, right? So we need to change this to an integer, right? So how do we do that? Parse int. Converts a string to an integer. So now if we do parse int here as well, we're going to take that value out of the dataset attribute and get the element from our lists array. It's a multi-level array, right? So if we delete this one now, we'll delete the following item undefined. Why is it undefined? Let's take this one step at a time. So let's say var list equals lists parse int myl.dataset.list ID. Let's just see if we can get this, and we'll say console.log list, and we'll see what we get when we, yeah. So it's getting the list. Oh, it's because it's in items. Items, right? So there we go. So now we can see that when we click on this, right, it will delete the following item, right? Value 0, right? So we can now remove this. We could remove this one of two ways. Right, like the inefficient way would be to loop through both of these things. So we can say for var I equals 0, I is less than or equal to what was it? List.length I plus plus. So right, so that's the list. Then we loop through it again. So we want to go through the items. J is less than or equal to lists I dot items dot length J plus plus. Okay, so now we're inside the list item. So when we try to delete it, we can just say if J equals let's grab these values. So I'm going to get the current one. Right? Var current list ID equals % that, and we'll do var current item ID equals parse int myl dot dataset dot item ID. All right, so we're getting those numbers and we're storing them. So now we can just say, when we're looping through this, if j or if I I equals current list ID and J equals current item ID, right? We want to do something specific. We want to just skip over it completely. Continue, right? Otherwise, maybe we'll make a new, right? Or new lists equals an array. And then as we go through this, right, we'll say new lists dot push is going to be the current value, right? So lists lists I. Okay. So as we loop through the list, let's put this object in the thing, and then as we loop through the array, we probably just want to just skip over the one that matches. This is probably super duper inefficient, right? We don't want to loop through a big data set every time we want to just remove an item, right? So we probably want to look at some of our JavaScript arrays, and we probably would just go look this up on W3 Schools, some of these places. Let's say delete an item from a JavaScript array. Okay. And so the correct answer here is array.splice. We kind of learned about this the first week. Okay. And so we could probably say, right, so we already know the index that we're looking at here. So we can simply, right, skip all that looping stuff and say lists current list ID dot items dot splice current item ID, right? So in theory, if we look at console.log now, console.log lists current list ID, right? We should see whichever one we deleted being removed from this element. And let's take this log out. So this line of code by itself, we probably need to put 1 in here, right? We just want to remove one element. So if we click on this code, right, we can now see that if we looked at lists itself, it's still got 2 lists in there, but now our items only has 1 element here. If we took out item 2, that list 1, now has 2 items in it, 1 and 3. This type of interaction is going to make a ton of sense later on when we learn about storing these, right? So this is hard-coded. Every time I reload this page, we get the same data set. But when we start talking about data storage, whether doing it locally in the browser with local storage, or we do it in the back end with a server, right? You can imagine that now I've updated this element and removed it permanently by simply writing a line of code that will remove it. For this one, right, this is to remove this item. Let's take this extra console log out here. Let's take this, right? So this is the code we need. We get the current item ID, we get the current list ID. For the not completed, for not deleting it, we just want to mark it as done. Our mechanism here would be lists. We still need to get current list ID and current item ID. So maybe what we do is, because we need this in both places, we'll put these up here. So they're outside of the if block. Now both of these conditions can use these variables we created. So I'll say lists current list ID dot items current item ID equals dot completed equals true. So now we just changed the value, right? If I click each and every one of these and we look at lists now, right? All of these have been marked as completed. All of these are completed. And now if we were to delete, right, now it goes down. And so if we look at lists now, we're behind the scenes changing a variable that is, we're treating it as like our storage, our database, right? The entirety of the app is running out of this one single variable. Now the only thing that we don't have implemented with this is there's no way for us to save that state persistently from the things we've learned so far. But saving this to local storage is extremely simple, and we'll learn how to do that over time. So that handled turning things on and off. What if I wanted to add new elements? Right, I want to click ASDF and click plus. Okay, well, I can't post to the server because we don't have a page to do that with, but we can simulate this by saying, what do we got here? What is our format here? So we made a form. Okay, great. So we'll just come in here and say, let's do this. We will write a new event listener. Say capture all form submits and do something special. Right? So we will say, is there a global on submit? I don't know. Let's see. Document dot add event listener submit. This probably won't work, but let's just test it and see what we get. And let's just try and stop. Let's do console.log submitting. And then we'll do event.prevent default. Let's just see if we can capture each submit. Okay, cool. So that's awesome. I'm glad that worked. That makes things way easier. All right, so we have a global event listener that's looking for any submit event, and it's preventing it from submitting the form. What we need to do is grab the list that we're submitting to. Right, for these two, it's grabbing a thing, and then store a new item in it or add it to our list of items to complete. So let's take some notes here. So if I'm a form inside an existing list, save my new item. If I'm a form to create a list, create the new list, right? And display it. Okay, so everyone knows kind of where we're going for here. So I've prevented the default. So I need my list to have some information. I need to know, right? So I probably want to come in here and put maybe even a hidden input, right? So I'll say input. Let's see this. Let's submit to list, and then we'll put in plus list ID. Plus. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying that each and every one of these forms. Where is it at here? I. Right, this is I, because we're inside this loop, where we're looping through the lists. So our list ID is I here. So I'm going to come in here and say, right, so for each of these pages, if we look at this element, right, this is submitting to list/0. This one is submitting to list/1. So that 1 is our list ID. And if I actually had a backend in place and the user didn't have JavaScript, right, they could type something in here and still post to the server at /list/1. But what we're going to do is we're in here copying this. So I'm going to say, let's grab the form action. Right, that's going to be our thing. So I'm going to say var action equals this dot, let's do event dot target dot get attribute action. And let's just make sure that we're getting that right. Console.log action. Let's see if that's actually giving us the value we expect to get. Okay, that gives us list 1. This gives us list 0. Perfect. This one will give us nothing. It's giving us pound because that's what the action is of that. So I can split on my slashes here. Right? If I split on this, split, and I'll put a slash. So what this is actually going to give me is an array that has nothing in the first part because it starts with a slash. Then it says list. Then it says the list number. Okay? So if action 1 equals list, right? I know I'm in a list, right? I need to get my, var list ID equals parse int action 2, right? So that's my list ID now. Whatever's in that array that we just split out, right? The third position, the second index, the third position in this array is the number of my list. So I can now actually, let's just, did I call this the same thing every time? Let's see. The name is item. Okay, that one has name as add list. All right, so if I'm in here, if I'm in this, I'm going to have a var item equals document.getElement by ID. Ooh, you know what? Go ahead.
So you got a lot of code there, and I was just wondering if anybody had any questions about what you've done so far.
Does anyone have any questions about what we've
Yeah.
done so far? Go ahead.
Yes, I don't know if anybody has questions or if they're following along really well. Because you can go on for days.
Yeah. I'm trying to explain the thought process and comment out as much as possible, like the sections of what I'm thinking through. And then as we write lines of code, hopefully the line of code is descriptive enough, because you should know most of these things that we're doing. Like get attribute action should inform you that we are grabbing this action attribute, and we showed off what it gives us in our browser tab. Then we split, and then we verify that that does that. So as we're going, like, does anyone have any questions? Like,
Yeah.
I think this is stuff you should know, and if you don't speak up and tell me that you don't.
To maybe understand better as to where things are going, you might understand what he's typing, but to how it's related to something else. If anybody has questions about that.
Is this going to be on GitHub to look at later?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm slowly tracking. I think my strategy is to kind of just follow along as much as I can, and then go back and really pause it and look through the code.
Yeah, excellent. If something doesn't make sense to you, I'm just chugging along. If you have any questions about any specific line of code, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask a question when I can answer it. It's a lot easier for me to answer it in the moment than to like jump back up and be like, what do we do back up here? And a lot of what I'm showing you is the real world method of writing software. It's like, I might not know all the lines of code I want to write, so I'm going to write a line of code and then go test it and see what comes out. And I'm going to go back to my editor, write another line of code. Sometimes I have to go look up a function name. This is the process in real time. You guys are seeing it. This is what you're going to do every day of your life, you know, for here on out if you get a job as a software engineer. This is the model. Okay, so now I've got a problem, right? If I do document.getElement by ID, right? My input doesn't have an ID. I can add it, but then the problem is I need to have a different ID for each of these elements. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to do ID equals, and I'll do item, and I'm going to do underscore. I'm going to do the same trick I did with this, where I'm going to say I want to get the input of the list ID I'm in. So I'm going to do item underscore plus I plus, and then double quotes. So now if we look at our code, if we inspect this, why is this? Oh gosh. There we go. So if you notice now, this input has an item ID of 1, and this input has an item ID of 0. Right, so now I can get the element by ID and know exactly what value I'm going to get out of this variable. Right? Does everyone understand what I did here? I just added a variable when I'm creating these elements in the first place, so that I can grab it up here in my thing. Right? So I can say item underscore plus action 2, right, or list ID, excuse me, because I parsed int list ID. So this is going to give me my item element, and then I can call .value, which is going to give me what is actually typed in the box. So we can just show this off, console.log item, and if I type ASDF in here and I hit plus, we see ASDF shows up in here. So now I want to actually just create an element, right? So first, I want to add the item to my items array. Items are my list object, right? So we want to add this up here. We're going to add this in here. So the simple way to do this, right? We can do this one of two ways. I'll show you the easiest way, right? Since we already wrote this function called render to-do lists, I can probably just add the item to that array and call render to-do list, and now the whole page has rebuilt. So let's do that. So I got the text. That's going to go in this value, right? So I can say var full item equals array, or equals object, and I can say value is item, right? This value right here, and I could say completed is false because it's not completed. And then what I can do is lists, because we have the list ID right here. We got that list ID. I can say list ID dot items, which is an array. Right? Dot items is an array. I'm just going to simply push this in here. Dot push value. Excuse me, full item. Full item. Right? This object that we just built. So the exact same format as we stored it in the first place. I'm going to shove it back in there so that it's a part of this list. Now, all I have to do to be done with this part is I can just call render to-do list again. Right? This is going to rebuild that entire page. Render to-do lists. Okay? And if I type some words in here now, ASDF goes in there. Right? I can build lists all the way down the page. I can go to this one, build stuff all the way down the page. And if we take a look at our lists object now, I still just got 2 lists. But now what we have is a whole bunch of new items that we put in there. Okay? We would do the exact same thing with create new list. Right? So if I wanted to capture the information from create new list, if I type something in here, right, this is going to console.log here. Let's clear this out. Right? It's going to console.log new list. And if I click plus, it's telling us the pound sign because that's what's in our action. So if I was to come in here, right, this is our list EL. This is our create new list. If I choose list, let's go new list, right? So if I say, hey, Eric, now we know we're in here, right? I can write code that says if we're not list, else if action 1 equals new list, right? Create a new list. Right? So we want to do the same sort of thing. Render to do lists right here. We want to write code to capture the list name, create a new list object, and then store it in the lists array. Same. Those are the 3 steps we're doing. We're really describing what we're going to do on each step of the process. Okay? So maybe what would be a cool exercise is I'm going to check this code into GitHub. And what I would like you guys all to do, I'll show you how to do this. Let's do publish to GitHub. I'm going to have to make this. Let's see. GitHub. Click on okay, I'm going to call this to-do lists public. Great. Copy this bad boy.
Did we go over it in this class where it's a lot easier to create the GitHub before creating the files in VS Code? Did we go over that?
We kind of mentioned it from a few different directions when we were learning.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to each path. So I'm showing you right now, I created it in GitHub, then I created a Git repository locally, and now I'm going to do git remote add origin, and I'm going to paste in that link that we just got from GitHub. So now we're linked. And so now, if I commit all of my code here, initial entry, okay, good, and then I push, okay. Now when I reload this page on GitHub, all of my code is here. So what I want everyone to do as homework is you're going to go in here and you're going to clone this branch. You're going to clone it this way. And I want you to go into the JS code here and make it so that when the new list form is used, you will create a brand new list. And the way that you're going to do that is, our list object has to have a list title. So whatever that value is from that form is going to go in the list title. And then the items is going to be just an empty array because you haven't put anything in there yet. So you're going to write these, however many lines of code it takes inside between lines. So I'll even put in here to do homework. to do homework. And so I want you guys to write this in it. So you're going to clone this branch, clone the branch, create a brand new branch with your name. So it'll be Josh, Karif, Bernard. You all have your own branches. And then when you, so I'll show you how I'm doing it, right? So like I'll, right, save homework spot, push, okay, and then get checkout -b to make a new branch. I'm going to say Eric H. So I'm going to write my lines of code. Eric was here, right? That's obviously not going to work. Let's Eric was here. I'm just going to put an empty string in here. Check it in. Add my work. Push it. And so now, when you're in here, when you get it all ready to go, you can click on branches and click on your branch, or you can click on the new pull request button. Submit the pull request with me as the reviewer. Okay, so you're going to say, this is how I did it. So I can go in and check your code and say, hey, that's pretty good. Okay, you'll have this code to use as an example, but you're going to have to probably solve some of the same problems I did with the previous one. You might have to add some hacks into the new form. You might have to figure out how to make it work. Okay, that will be your homework for tomorrow. Any questions? It's pretty cool. I'm very happy with this. This is the start of a very good to-do list system. So whoever writes the best code might be deployed in my future to-do list app. Nice job. So this is how senior engineers get junior engineers to do all their work for them. It's the wave of the future. You'll see. You'll see. Any questions about anything? Events? Anything we've covered today? Just want to get in there and practice. We also have some other homework. This is more of like a traditional homework where it's talking about events, I believe. Let's see. 5. Guess not. All right. Well, this will be the one. Yeah. So you're gonna actually write the code and make it amazing. How's everybody feeling? We struggled a bit today. Is there anything that we wanted to go over in terms of functions or naming arguments, or you guys just ready to write some code?
Ready to attempt to write some code.
I believe in you. You can do it. You're at least 10 times smarter than I was when I started programming. And I didn't have any teachers. I had to bash my head against the wall. There was no safety net for me. You guys are in great shape. And for where you are, right, starting from very little experience to we're now kind of on day 2 of week 5, you guys are killing it. Absolutely killing it. So stay motivated, stay positive. You guys are way ahead of pace compared to how the previous cohort was, or how some previous cohorts have been in the past. You guys are all amazing.
That's a sign of a great leader. Build your troops up.
Well, Any questions? Anything we want to talk about? Or are you just ready to get to it?
I need to play. I need to try to get in there and start figuring stuff out.
Okay. Yeah, part of the journey of this, right? Like we give you homework, we give you opportunities to like test things and dabble. You should not be doing just the stuff we assign you, right? You should be going, like you can even write in here, like document in your console, document dot add event listener, click function event console dot log hi, right? So like literally every time you click on the page, it's gonna say hi. Just play. Like there's no right or wrong answer here. Fiddle with things. See what they do. See what the difference is between client X, client Y on your mouse event versus like offset X, offset Y. See what those do. Play with screen X, screen Y. That's like if you got a big monitor, you can track while your browser's open. You can track from all the way, right? screen X dot screen Y goes the entire width of your monitor. So you can see even when people are outside of the boundaries of your page. One thing that is kind of cool, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but there are some websites that, like, when you move your mouse up to like the title bar to close a tab, they will like prompt you and be like, hey, you're trying to leave with unsaved changes, right? That kind of thing. Those are just JavaScript events. See if you can make that kind of thing work. Play around, explore and experiment. Work on your portfolios. Start adding some of this interactivity. Keep working on design so that you can make things look better. Right, I've got these lists in here that have this list card, right? And I've got a border radius in here of 5px. Would it look better with a more rounded border? Or a less rounded border? I don't know. These are the kind of things you can just come in here and experiment. Alright, I'll stop beating a dead horse in that you should be exploring. So, 7:46, go explore. Or stick around if you have individual questions, you need help with anything. We got extra time, so if anybody needs help with homework today or anything, let me know.